are you?
I'm doing good. Does
Where are you? I
video
can't
work?
see you. It
Okay, let me
should.
see if
I
this
don't
will
know.
do it.
Oh, there you are.
Okay. Hey.
Long time no see.
Yes, it's good
It's
to
been
see you
quite a few
again.
years. Good to see you. Thank you for doing this. I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Well, I was really honored when you asked me about it, and then I was kind of baffled, thinking, well, what am I going to say?
I know. I did one with my brother the other day. So because I was coming home from work and then I realized you didn't get the question. So I was like, oh well, maybe I'll just do one with Taylor tonight. So I have something to post today. And he was like, well, what kind of questions you're gonna ask me? I'm like, I don't know. We're just gonna figure it out. We're gonna
Right.
talk about it.
Well, good.
Um, yeah. So I want to start with kind of what success means to you and what that has kind of looked like in your life and what that definition is to you.
That's good. That was very critical when you first told me about this. Is I had to assess what did I think was successful. Um, I'd say when I was a lot younger, I used to think it was about, it was like a place you would arrive at, and things would
Hmm.
be much easier, and that things would make sense, and that you would feel like this overwhelming, like, hey, I've made it.
I made it.
Um, yeah. And then, as I've lived, it's more about that journey and seeking it out, and that you're never satisfied. And if you are satisfied, then you should probably reassess where you are, because it would mean that you're not growing.
Yeah, you've
Um,
settled for kind of complacency.
right. Yeah. And that the easy win is where it stops. And I don't
Yeah,
think any of us want that to be the case.
yeah,
But
absolutely. So
the,
in terms of like your career history, and I know that you did some time in the military and then ended up in art. So what kind of changed that path for you?
well, let me say I've bounced around a lot. First, I
Yeah.
went to school to study Native American anthropology. Went to South Dakota because that was where it was one of the best places in the United States to go study. So I went there and I discovered that, hey, some of these concepts I had in my head were a lot more make believe than I realized. And I grew up a lot
Hmm.
realizing that, hey, what I read about and the reality are two separate things. And I had enrolled in an art class just because I was good at it, and I knew,
Hmm.
okay, at least I'll have one thing that's easy. And I did well in it, and I kept taking art classes. I got scholarships because I was able to um, express myself well, and I was in an environment where people appreciated that. So that
Okay.
ended up paying for my college. After that, I found myself assembling computers in Iowa on an assembly line, and I thought, geez, is this it? Um,
This cannot be it.
yeah, this can't be it. And I realized that being economically disadvantaged or poor, that I would have very few options to get out of where I was. So at
Mhm.
that point, I decided, hey, I'm going to join the military and do something with my time. I understood that I would get a GI Bill at the end, and I felt very strongly about doing something with my youth and my health
Mhm.
at that time. So I enlisted as an infantry soldier, which was very good. Uh, that would line to
You learn
that.
a lot.
I learned a lot, and to get to one of your questions you had is the self doubt thing. Is
Hmm.
that in the military? Oddly, unlike life, there's really established criteria for what is successful, and you either
Hmm.
make it or you don't, or you're sort of in between those two things. So it became evident to me that, yeah, I can do all these things they're asking me to do, and I can do better than the people around me can do. And so that made me sort of mistrust or not trust their criteria anymore, because
There
I
was no
realized, geez, if I can
challenge
hit
because it
these
felt
things, then
easy.
obviously they need to work on it.
Yeah.
But at any rate, so I got out of the military. used my GI Bill to go to grad school at University of Nebraska-Lincoln, where I studied sculpture and ceramics under some incredibly wise people. And I couldn't help but think as I was going to grad school that maybe it would have been better if I had just taken my money and bought some equipment and some rent some space and just work. So I went ahead and finished it because I had started it. Got done with that. Moved to Florida because my parents weren't in real great health. And I worked at Florida Southern for a while as an instructor, teaching sculpture and drawing and design. But I realized there were no full-time positions, and that's the economy. Sort of like you guys are facing an economy now that's really constricted. And someone, oddly enough, the person that was cutting my hair, I was like thinking about like, geez, I don't have a whole lot of options. She says, well, why don't you teach high school? And I was like, and then I did.
Yeah.
And I ended up.
You're like, well, here we are.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
when I was
makes me feel successful.
Yeah, I find that success it's not a science, and it's more of a fulfillment thing. It's like, for some people, I have conversations with my mom all the time, and I'm like, what would it make you happy every day to get up and go to a certain kind of job? And to her, it's not so much of a job, it's more of I just want to be a better parent and a better wife, and I want to be a good person. Being a better person can be what success is to you if that brings you fulfillment. It's simply just living a simple life and being happy. There's no economic measurement on it. Everyone thinks, oh, I have to be a millionaire to be successful. That's not true. It's whatever it means to you.
Yes, I think your mom is dead right.
Yeah. And so in terms of, we were talking about kind of the self-doubt concepts. And I remember when I took your class I just kept taking your class because I'm like, I really just don't want to, I was no good at 3D art, but there I was taking it because I just wanted to stay in your class. But
thank you.
In terms of the self-doubt, how do you kind of push past that, especially in art? And that's why I kind of came up with that question, because it's so easy to look at something and say, well, that's not pretty, but it may just not be pretty to you. There's no rules to art. It's whatever you see in the eye of whoever's looking at it. So how would you what kind of advice would you give to someone who's dealing with that inadequate feeling?
Wow. I'd say it's dangerous, and that I would be lying if I didn't say I didn't have to face the same thing. I had an instructor, one of my very first design instructors would just walk along, look down at what you were doing, and he might just crumple it up and throw it on the floor and keep walking. So when it comes to self-doubt, he really hammered that home, because he didn't want us to go out thinking that we were really good, because we weren't. And with you guys, when I was teaching y'all, it seemed like I had to tell you some things to be honest, and I had to encourage you at the same time. And I'm not real good with that sort of, I am good with that dichotomy, but what happens is that I usually get sort of snarky and a smart aleck. But the point was that I want you guys to be prepared that things are not going to work. And that that's normal, and that's how we learn. And if we want to paint flowers and make pretty pictures, that's great. But if you want to do something beyond that, then you're going to have to start asking yourself some hard questions and then providing the hard answers. And that feeling of self-doubt is going to go further behind you, because you're more concentrated on, what am I going to get out of this? What am I learning? What's my question? And then over time, self-doubt just kind of disappears, and you realize that, oh, I don't even care about it anymore.
Because it's more of a learning thing than I'm going to sit here and judge myself. And you can choose to stay stuck in that place forever, or you can detach yourself and not take it so personally and say, I'm learning as we go. And kind of, my brother, I don't know where he heard it, but he says all the time, like, we'll be coming up with ideas for something. And I'm like, no, but you remember that thing we came up with? And he's like, you have to be open to everything and attached to nothing. And he heard it, I want to say from like Earl Nightingale or someone from way back then like that. And then I think about that all the time, because it's like, it's not that it's a bad idea. Just because you have it doesn't mean you have to stick to it, but you may have something better. There could be something better. Don't, be so hard on yourself about it, but be able to
Yeah.
say this isn't good enough.
I would say that's very wise. That detachment is very, it's key to being a professional.
Yeah.
Um, and as an artist, it's real easy to be sensitive and allow
Hmm.
yourself to be wrapped up in it, and that's the art you make is you. It's
Yeah,
not. It's a flat thing on a piece of paper. It's not the you that's there. And
exactly.
yeah, I'm glad
And
you lived long enough to be able to see that.
thank you. And so I remember I posted something last week and you commented and you're like, oh my God, I love Alan Watts. And that's part of why I'm like, oh my God, I have to, talk to him about this kind of thing, because it's kind of a philosophy, success, and things like that, more than a textbook definition. So I was like, that would be awesome to have you on here and talk about it. But so the last big question I guess I have for you, the hefty question, is in terms of taking risk. And you always used to tell me that you're like, it's so safe. Take some risk, get messy with it. You don't have to stay in the four edges of your paper, do things differently. So I've taken that and I've kind of applied it to my whole life. So, things I'm like, oh, I don't know if that's going to work, but I'm going to do it anyway. And we're going to see what happens,
Good.
and kind of take an educated guess a little bit. But how do you kind of help somebody who has a hard time with making the decision between, is it a good idea or a bad idea, or should I take the leap?
Well, first let's establish the parameters. As long as it's not like life threatening.
Yeah.
Okay. So as long as that's clarified. But I've got to ask you a question that kind of refers back to this: is did you feel braver with more experience and more knocking yourself down or getting knocked down and getting back up?
Hmm.
Did you?
Feel braver? I'd say yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is, when you take the risk and it doesn't work out, it all kind of depends on how you look at it and kind of the belief system you went into it with. If you say, well, I'm going to do this, and if it doesn't work, then I'm not going to try again, then in that sense, there's no courage in that sense. But if you
Right.
say, if this doesn't work, you put yourself in kind of a sink or swim situation and it
Right.
doesn't work, well, it's sink or swim. I either have to keep swimming or I'm going to just sit here and drown. Like, you have to
Right.
make the decision, but you kind of have to decide that ahead of time. So, in the sense of like, so my brother and I moved out. I'm like, all right, this is kind of scary. I've never lived on my own before.
Right.
So that's a leap. That's a risk. I don't really know. I worked in the hair industry where some months are really busy, some months are really slow, and my paychecks are not regular.
Right.
So that was a risk that I had to take, but it was more of I'll I'll figure it out. So
Good.
in that sense, when things get hard, I do feel brave because I'm like, oh, I'm falling, but I know that I can figure out how to catch myself.
Yes. Yep. That you're not going to really, it's not as dire. And
Yeah.
when that's the suck thing about being young is you're over it now. But at the
Hmm.
time when you were there, I could see how frustrated you were and
Yeah.
how difficult it was. And there's no way to tell a kid like, hey, it's gonna get better. It's gonna get
Yeah.
it may not get easier, but you're gonna learn to roll with it. And
Yeah.
yeah, that's where that's probably where I get my sense of success, is when I see you guys later and I realize how well
Yeah.
you do. And even if you fall down, you're still strong. And I
Yeah.
really love that.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. But I
And
don't want you to
so,
fall down.
yes, nobody wants to fall down, but it happens.
It does. It
It
does. And
happens a
that's
lot.
yeah, I would say I learned a lot of that from my dad.
Hmm.
He let me fall down all the time. He
Yeah.
was not gentle. He was not
Hmm.
protective. So broken bones were part of growing up. And
Yeah.
that's a lot different though than I think it is now. And I think in
Hmm.
some ways it's going to be harder for people to feel successful or to feel like they have a point and a reason to be around on this planet
Hmm.
if they don't get challenged when they're younger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I find that it's really hard. And I remember in my like senior year of high school, and that was kind of when all the decisions have to happen. So I'm like, I don't know what the hell I'm going to do with the rest of my life. I've experienced a fraction of what, figure the average person lives to be 70, 80 years old. I've only lived a fifth of that, a fifth of 100, how am I supposed to make this life decision? And, things happen. And like, I intended to go to college, and then I changed my ideas probably 100 million times. And you probably remember that. I'm like, I want to be a teacher. I want to be an architect. What the hell are these things? I don't know why,
Right.
but it was just a trying to find myself thing. But I find that by detaching myself and saying, well, even if, and I talk to my mom about it all the time, if you want to do something different in 5 years, you're still going to be 5 years older than you were when you started. So wouldn't you rather be 5 years older doing something you'd like to do than saying, I don't want to regret the decision that I made, or I spent all this money on a degree that I can't use. I have to use it because I spent all this money, it's shit
Yep.
happens, things have to change sometimes.
Yep. But it becomes a trap.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really does.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
yeah, I would commend the wisdom in your decision making. And it's not easy. And every single person's going to have a different way of making it through this whole thing. I guess that's the other misfortune of, say, a high school, is that it gets near the end and everybody's asking you, what are you going to do? And you're like,
yeah,
I don't
have no
I don't even
idea.
know
I don't even know who I
myself.
am.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
And now you're asking me to come up with some sort of grand life scheme. And
Yeah.
geez, that's a lot of pressure. But I think it's always been that way. But thank goodness we're not living in a time where you're going to do what your parents did because that's what they did and that's what they did. So we are very fortunate to live in a time where
Yeah,
you've got your own way.
you make the decision. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I said my last question was going to be my last question,
Okay.
but the
I'm
real
good.
last question is, so in terms of, so you said you've kind of hopped around a lot. So
Sure.
what would you say was one of the really hard things that you've had to overcome, whether it was personally or financially or in decision making, or, what was something that you really had to overcome?
Great question. The hardest thing I had to beat was myself and
Yeah.
my ego, because I'm very egotistical, and I think that, hey, I've got good skills, I've got abilities, and then at some point, I assess myself. I used to assess myself by how well I was doing to others, and then as it became like there's fewer and fewer people around, you realize, oh geez, I'm the guy that's got to figure out how do I make him happy. But then I kind of realized that in my head, I've been trying to feed this ego the whole time and make the ego happy and puff that up. And when I discovered that, it was like it deflated the whole thing,
Yeah.
which made life a lot more enjoyable.
Hmm.
Probably me a little more reasonable to work with, but it really was kind of tackling that arrogance.
Yeah.
So it's a weird balance. Weird.
Okay.
I'm not there yet.
Yeah. I don't think you ever really get there, and it's hard
No.
to battle with your ego. But in reality, when you're able to step aside and say, all right, my ego and what I think of myself is not truly in my purest form who I am, then it's a little easier to not get so upset and take things as personally, and be able to not get mad at yourself when you did something wrong or you made a bad choice, and be like, all right, I screwed up. I have to fix it now, but
Yep.
being able to separate me as who I am versus who I think I am are two very different things.
Yeah. I mean, it's always interesting to wonder what someone else thinks about something, because they're so different, and that what the little voice in our head that says we're not good enough or strong enough or fast enough, everybody else has got the same thing in their head. And that's kind of a big part of realizing that we're all the same person.
Some of us just hide it better.
Yeah, we hide it, or hide it from ourselves, or we're just
Yeah.
at different points and we can't see it. But I think as you get older, you realize, geez, I've got a lot more in common with people than I don't.
Yeah.
That's the other beauty, but that's also missing, and you don't get it without experience.
Yeah.
So, you got to be brave enough to get that experience.
Yeah. Just go through it. The only way to get through it is to go through it. You can't go over it or under it or around it,
Right. Because I think we've all seen people that manage to kind of get by a little bit, but they also run into some roadblocks later, and they're harder for them to get over if they don't understand it. And one thing is that if you don't understand something, it's going to keep showing back up in your life until you do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, so on an ending note, what's kind of one piece of advice that you would give to anybody who is, I guess, kind of what you do for your students, because they're kind of in that age, but someone who, no matter how old they are, kind of just now realizing that they can do more than what they've been doing? What piece of advice would you give them in kind of starting that journey to whatever success looks like to them?
Wow. That's a tough one.
I know.
I would like to be able to just say that enjoy those moments when you feel that way. They will come back, but they will never come back the same way. And so if you are always looking for that same thing, that little trigger that's going to pop, it's going to always be different. And I would agree with your brother, and you have to be open to things to happen. I'd say he's very wise in that yeah, you're not going to see it if you keep looking for the same thing. It's not,
Yeah.
nothing new will ever show up. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome. I'm really glad you're around good people.
Thank you. Yes. I'm with my brother a lot, and he kind of introduced me to motivation. So kind of how I started getting into all of this. He used to
Good.
listen to motivational speeches all the time, and we'd be in the car and he's like, I'm going to put on motivation whether you like it or not. And so I'd listen to it, and then I started to learn the voices, and I'm like, oh, that's Eric Thomas or whoever. And then fast forward to a couple months ago, one of my favorite speakers, Les Brown, he was doing a speaking course. And I was like, I don't know, should I do it? Like, we just moved financially. I don't know if it's a good idea. He's like, Sarah, if you don't do it now, you're never going to do it. What you're going to use it for, I have no idea, but do it. And so I did. And now all these opportunities started popping up. And, I've met a lot of really great people through there. And so,
excellent.
I took the risk.
Yeah. And you got a reward.
Yeah.
I wanted to tell you about one other guy you might like, would be called Studs Terkel.
Mm-hmm.
It's a strange name, but he used to interview people and just regular people and ask them kind of similar, not the same questions you're asking, but he might be someone you might enjoy learning about as well. Sort of like Alan Watts.
Yeah, I love Alan Watts.
Yeah, me too.
We're going to have a conversation about that another day, because he's just something else, but
he is. And I'm glad you're open to that. Thank you.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate it so much.
It's great seeing you again, Sarah.
Good to see you too. Well, we'll be in touch soon. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Bye-bye.
Bye.